Good afternoon and welcome to yet another episode of Mr. Long Island's Search for Truth and Beauty. My name is Michael Watt, aka Mr. Long Island, and this week our guest is Robert Palasciano. Right? I got it?
That'll work.
You think somebody who grew up in Massapequa would have less trouble with Italian names, but Robert Palasciano has written a fascinating book called From Anger to Enlightenment. And we're going to get into that, Robert. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
As we do every week, and I'm pretty sure I told you about this. I hope I'm not springing something on you. We start off every program talking about pizza. And the reason why is, as diverse as a region as Long Island is, 126 different communities, every town has at least one pizza place. So we determined to come up with the greatest list of pizza places on Long Island, because Long Islanders will drive past 10 pizza places to get to one really good one.
Absolutely.
So you got a go-to place, you got people coming in from out of town, you really want to impress them with Long Island pizza, where do you take them?
All right, so the best focaccia on the planet that you can't buy is at a place called Mama Pina's.
Mama Pina's.
Mama Pina's, see, that's my mother-in-law.
Oh, okay.
My mother-in-law, just, from Italy, from a small town in Bari, makes the best focaccia. That's the best pizza you can't buy.
Okay.
All right, so for the best pizza you can buy, I'm always going to go to Vincent's Clam Bar in Carl Place.
Okay.
Also, just the best Italian food that
Where in Carl Place is that?
It's right on Old Country Road.
That's okay. Right on just west of the Meadowbrook.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right on Old Country Road there, right across from the Roosevelt Field Mall.
Okay.
Yeah, great place, great people.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay, we'll add that one to the list. And
absolutely.
Believe it or not, you're the second person to claim that they have access to the best pizza that's in somebody's home. So it's nice to know that there are all Long Islanders out there who swear by the pizza they make.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. All right, so Robert, somebody was telling me your story, or started to tell me your story. As soon as I started to hear it, I said, I got to have Robert on this program. It's called Mr. Long Island's Search for Truth and Beauty, and the truth is really tied to issues about living on Long Island usually, but your story is fascinating. Now, I'm going to let you tell it, but just as a lead-in, now, 23 years ago, you were working in a bank, leading a very average kind of Long Island life, and take it from there.
Right, so I was a manager of a bank on Long Island in Garden City Park, and doing my job, but in fact, actually, even before the incident happened, I'll tell a story.
Sure.
That morning, and I've done this hundreds of times, open the bank alone, pull in, park, walk in, open the first set of doors, lock those behind me. Banks have two sets of doors. And then go to open the second set of doors, and something wasn't going to let me open that door. Something was screaming at me. Something was holding my arm. Don't put the key in that door.
Some invisible force.
Something invisible. I felt something. It was like somebody was tugging on my arm. Don't go in the bank. So I'm looking around. After 10 minutes, I figured, I've got to go in the bank. I'm the manager. I've got to open up. So I did.
And this had never happened to you before?
Never.
Okay.
Never had this feeling. I opened the bank. Everybody came in. And we opened at 9 o'clock, and then at 9:05, a single guy, a solo guy, came into the bank in a trench coat, dressed nicely enough. So I stood up. I thought, hey, this is a new account.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to do some business. And he walked over to my desk. He knew exactly who I was, and he handed me an index card. And the index card was a hold-up note.
Wow.
Now this is the first hold-up note that I'd ever been handed. But I'd seen many.
Okay.
Because subsequent after the robberies. And this was completely unusual. It was on a 4x6 index card, written on both sides with so many details and instructions. He didn't want to speak.
Okay.
He only wanted me to read this card. I suppose it took maybe for him too long to do it, or he was unstable to begin with. In the end, he shot me twice, and then proceeded to shoot two of my coworkers.
Wow.
Twice each.
And this is fairly point blank, because you're saying that, wow.
Point blank. In fact, he shot me, and then he shot my coworker behind me. And then he turned to go out the door. He walked about 15 feet, and then he shot another coworker.
Wow.
I mean, So he was a kind of an angry guy.
But there was no warning, no, give me the money or I'm going to shoot. He just handed you the note.
Yeah, there was, for him, maybe it was taking too long.
Okay.
He did pull out another gun. He pulled out a first gun.
Right.
I said it was his Uzi. The note said it was his Uzi, but it was a fake gun. And he saw the look in my eye that I knew it was fake. Maybe he got angry and pulled out a real gun. I saw it, and he started firing.
Now, as a bank manager, I'm sure they give you some kind of training for handling a situation like this. Had you ever been involved? You'd been in the banking industry how long at that point?
For over 10 years.
Okay. Had you ever been involved in a holdup before?
No, I had never been directly involved in a holdup. They tell you, look at the guy, see what his description is, see how tall he is, judge him again. Absolutely, cooperate. Right. I had to cooperate. I had people that were relying on me for their safety.
Right.
Nevertheless, this guy had other plans.
Right.
He never got any money, but he shot us. I died on the bank floor, laying in a pool of my own blood. And what happened next was really remarkable. My spirit came right out of my body.
Okay.
And I was vertical, in the air, looking at my...
You were separate from your body.
I was separate, looking at my body on the floor.
Your physical body laying on the floor.
I could still hear one girl behind me screaming.
Wow.
I could see another girl, the other girl who was shot, trying to get out the bank. I could still smell the gun smoke in the air.
Wow.
And then it began with a touch on my right shoulder. And in front of me, in the bank, was a woman who introduced herself as Our Lady of Mercy.
Wow.
And in an instant, we weren't in the bank anymore. She took me to another place.
Wow.
That I knew could only be heaven.
Wow.
It was a beautiful, gorgeous place, but not so much what it looked like as what it felt like. There was no pain. There was no anxiety. There was no anguish. There were no phone calls. There's no job. It's just perfect peace and complete love. That's the feeling that I got when Our Lady touched me.
I've heard from other people, and they call them NDEs, near-death experience. In your case, was a real death experience, was that overwhelming sense of light and unconditional love. Did you recognize it as such, or?
Oh, absolutely. There was no clue where I was and what was happening.
Wow.
I knew exactly.
You had no doubt. You knew.
I knew exactly where I was, and I wasn't shot. I was still in. Recently somebody asked me, I heard that when you die, you're a younger version of yourself. Well, I don't know if that's true for everybody. For me, I was like I was when I went to work that morning, wearing the same clothes. I just wasn't shot, and there was nothing earthly about me anymore. I was just perfect.
Well, I've heard people say, we think we're human beings sometimes having a spiritual experience, but in reality, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And at this moment, you no longer were that human being. You went back to the spiritual form.
Right. And it was completely amazing.
Let me ask you: prior to this happening, would you have considered yourself a spiritual person?
I always considered myself a spiritual person. We went to church Easter and Christmas.
Right.
We did that, right?
Okay.
So it wasn't like we went all the time, but I always felt, and I didn't know why, but I always felt spiritual. I always felt like God was with me.
Okay.
I don't know. I couldn't explain it to you. It was my little thing.
Okay.
And then when I was in heaven, it was real clear.
It was everything that you had thought it would be or expected it to be. Then what happens?
Then Our Lady holds out in her hands this brilliant white ball of light.
Okay.
And she extends her hands to me, like to take it. And I don't want to let her down.
Right.
So I put out my hands, and she put this light inside my hands, and the light went all over my body. It was like hot, and I could feel it, but it didn't burn me. And it just covered me head to toe. And then it filled me up like I was a sponge absorbing this light. It all went inside me. She said, "This is the light of my son, Jesus.
Wow.
Use it well, for you have much to do." And I was like, what do I have to do? She didn't tell me what I had to do or how to use it, but she did say, "I'll always be with you. I'll always be right next to you." And I've always felt her.
Wow.
In fact, writing this book, believe me, it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because I had to relive so many horrible stories and memories. And, it gave me strength and fortitude to know that there was somebody helping me. Some people say, "Hey, did you use a ghostwriter?" And
No pun intended.
I would tell them, "Yeah, I did, but not the kind that you think of." Well, what do you mean? If they say, "What do you mean?"
Right.
They don't get it. If they understand.
Well, I don't want to get too off track, but I heard a quote from Ernest Hemingway, who was talking about the writing process. And there's a school of thought that we're not really creative, we're just conduits for God's creativity.
Thank you.
And he said, if you find yourself pushing the pencil, put it down, because you're not letting it flow through. So that's fascinating. But
That's exactly how I wrote this book.
Wow.
I'd wake up in the middle of the night. My wife would be, "Where are you going?"
It's time.
"I've got to go." And,
Right.
it's coming out.
I want to come back to that,
Got it.
but okay, so you get in the light, you get in the past, and what happens?
So I say, I really want to stay. I know I had, I wasn't married at the time, but I had my brothers, I had my parents who were still alive, and I said, "I want to be here." She goes, "It's not your time. You have to go back."
You were telling her you wanted to stay.
I did.
Okay.
And she said, "You
That's
have to go back.
interesting.
You have something
Not
to
your
do.
time. Wow.
You've
Okay.
got something to do." And then I went back to the bank. My spirit went into the body, and leaving was beautiful.
Okay.
Coming back was like an explosion and a tornado.
Okay.
I mean, it was, and the pain, it all came back. The EMS guys brought me back, said, "It's a miracle,
Wow.
we did it." And we're like, "Well, yeah, you had something to do with it." And, so I'll tell you a funny story. They put me into the ambulance. It's November. It's a cold day. And they took the other two girls out.
Right.
And they put me in the ambulance, and now I'm locked down. I could see the light above my head. And I went to all right, the driver, go. And he tried to start the ambulance, and I heard click, 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 and the light went to black, and the battery was dead.
Wow.
On my ambulance.
Wow.
So I said to the guy, "This is going to ruin my whole day." And he said, "You know you would just died." And he said, and I said, "If you knew what I knew,
Wow.
you'd know I'm going to be okay." And he just looked at me kind of funny.
So you went from this feeling of unconditional love and warmth and peace, and now all of a sudden you're back in the body, and it's kind of like waking up. I don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
But I would imagine it's kind of like when you wake up after being out all night, partying all night, and for that one instance you're feeling really good, then all of a sudden, pow, the pain kicks in.
Yeah, the pain kicked in, but I knew something that nobody else knew.
Okay.
I was going to live. I didn't know how bad the injuries were, and they were horrible. I mean, I should never have lived at all, because the way the bullet tore me up, bullets tore me up. It was really bad. But I knew I was going to live. I was going to.
So
live.
you've suffered these devastating physical injuries, attacks on your physical system. People have already thought you were dead, and now they're looking at you, go, "There's no way this guy's going to survive this," but because it's not your time.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So, get into the hospital, a lot of operations.
What hospital do you remember?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I spent 77 days there. It was Winthrop Hospital in the
Winthrop,
surgical
okay.
intensive care unit. And a lot of pain, a lot of surgeries, procedures, a lot of staples and sutures. And so one day, it's the middle of the afternoon, right? The janitor had just cleaned the room. I could still smell the pine on the floor, and the nurses. I was right outside the nurses' station. And my door was open. And a guy comes to my doorway, and I'm kind of propped up in bed, And I look at this guy, and he's just standing at me, and he's dressed in just regular street clothes, not like a doctor or a nurse, and he's just looking at me, and I'm like, more bad news. You know, what's going to happen now? He comes to the foot of my bed, and he just looks at me, and he's shaking his head like this. I'm like, please, tell me what's wrong.
Right.
All right? Not a word. Then he comes to the side of my bed, the right side of my bed. He leans into me like this. This young guy with long brown hair, and he says, "You're not supposed to be here."
Wow.
He says, "You were chosen for a reason. Find out what it is."
Wow.
He turns around. I said, "Okay," like I got the message. He turns around, and he walks out of the room, and he makes it right down the hallway, and I call the nurses. But they say, you know, we don't know who that guy was.
Wow.
We don't recognize him.
You're describing it, and I say we didn't see anybody
Right.
like
It was
that.
it was a young guy with long brown hair and brown eyes. He was supposed to give me a message, and he did, and I never forgot it.
Wow.
You know, so who was this guy? He wasn't dressed like a doctor or a nurse. He didn't come from another room. He wasn't
Right.
like that family member, because he would have said, "Hey, I have a relative in another room," and he would have compared stories. He would have told me his name. He didn't tell
So
me
a
his
total
name.
stranger with no business being in the hospital.
Came and told me a message, didn't say anything else. You know, people like to try to one-up your story. Hey,
Right.
you're pretty bad. There's somebody else even worse. You know, none of that. None of that.
And he said, "You don't belong here.
You're not supposed to be here.
You're not supposed to be here."
You know?
Do you think he meant you're not supposed to be still on Earth, or you're not supposed to be
He's
still in the hospital?
not supposed to be here. You were chosen for a reason.
Okay.
Like, okay, I'm getting a message, you know, and no, he's not. I'm not supposed to be here, but there's a reason why I'm here.
Okay.
Find out what it is. Find out the reason that you're here. I'm like, okay, right now I'm kind of still tied up in the hospital.
Right.
You know, and I didn't know what the purpose of any of this was.
All right, let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, so you're back in the body now. You're feeling this horrific pain. You're going through all kinds of injuries. Tell us a little bit about the rehab process, and I have a reason for asking the question. Just walk us through what kind of rehab you had to go through, and what was it like?
The physical rehab. Well, I'd always worked out all my life, you know.
Okay.
So after 77 days, when I finally left the hospital, you know, they said, you know, we'd like you to do rehab, and I chose not to. I chose to do it myself. I was a runner, lifted weights, knew a lot about physiology, biology, and, you know, herbal medicine. Always studied that on my own. So, and that's what I did. You know, it took me a week or so before I could do more than walk up and down the stairs. Then I started walking. Then I started running, and I started lifting weights. And I got myself back into shape.
Wow. Now, but you're in the hospital for like 2.5 months.
Right.
I imagine you're in a great deal of pain. Are you wondering why you have to, if you've already been to heaven and you have a message that you have to deliver, but in the meanwhile your physical body still has to recuperate, and I would imagine you were in a great deal of pain. I mean, what was that like? And walk us through that. Were you angry, or, you know, the name of the book is From Anger to Enlightenment. So let's talk a little bit about the anger, if you don't mind.
You know, the pain increased. I figured, I came back. She told me, you're going to live. I thought that was going to be the worst part of it.
That's what, yeah.
But it wasn't.
Okay.
All of this pain, it made me grow the anger inside of me for this guy. Now, I don't know who he was. He was never caught, never seen, never captured. As far as I know, he's still alive.
Okay.
So I just call him the olive skin man, because that's what he looked like.
Okay.
And I started to hate him more. And then the nightmares and the flashbacks would come. And in addition to the physical pain, I had to deal with all of this. And I said, one day, I'm going to find this guy. And you know what I'm going to do to him, right?
So you literally went from heaven to a living hell.
To a living hell. And it was the pain and then the anger, which really drove me for many years.
So even though you had seen heaven and you'd seen this unconditional love, you were still angry because of the pain that you were enduring and the fact that this guy got away with what he did.
Got away. He shot 2 of my coworkers, who were also my friends, and he hurt a lot of people. And you know, I couldn't get past it.
Okay.
I couldn't. and probably there was a reason that I couldn't get past it, So I always pray. I always pray to Mary, and every morning I'd say, thanks for each great day.
Okay.
And every night I'd say, can you please stop my pain?
Okay.
And I'm praying for them to stop my pain, but one day I felt like maybe I was asking God for something He wasn't prepared to give me.
Okay.
I thought maybe I should be praying for something that I could use to heal myself.
Now, how long after what happened, how long after did that epiphany come to you?
This was at least 20 years later.
Oh, okay. Wow. So for 20 years, you're carrying around this ball of anger in you about what happened to you and the fact that this man got away with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it hurt me in many ways.
Okay.
Although I keep a positive attitude on everything I do, it stays with you. And the anger and the guilt were things that I needed to get rid of, but I didn't know how. I thought the only way to get rid of my anger was to find the guy who did this and kill him, because I had to kill the monster that created it.
Okay, but you also said guilt. Where would the guilt come from?
Well, the guilt. Well, I was the guy in charge. And these co-workers were counting on me to be safe. And I was supposed to keep them safe. At least that's how I felt. I was the guy.
Wow.
No matter what happened, it's my responsibility. And I carried that for many years.
Wow. Okay, so even though, you know how the movie ends. There's heaven and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And yet you're still angry and you're still guilty and you're still really hurting yourself further. Right. Wow. And it took you 20 years to kind of let go of that a little bit. Walk us through that transition.
Yeah, so one day, I needed to get rid of the anger. So I'm praying for what I need.
Okay.
And I figured, I had a little epiphany, and I thought, I need enlightenment. I need understanding. I need to know who this guy was. I need to understand why it happened.
Okay.
So, nothing God does is easy. So at the time, I was taking prescription anti-anxiety drugs, but it's really bad stuff. And I was recommended by a doctor, look, first, before you can even heal, you have to get rid of that.
Fascinating.
So I said, what do I do? He said, you've got to go to like the best place I know, to a rehab to get off. So I checked myself in, and this is where my understanding started. Funny place for it, but I meet a guy. In the book, I call him Seth. And Seth is a young man who was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and he did a lot of really bad things. He hurt people, he stole, he robbed, he even hurt people physically. And he began to get really angry. But I've seen angry people. We've all seen angry people.
Right.
But this guy became so incited that I saw the look for only the second time in my life, the same look I saw from the guy who shot me.
Wow.
The guy who, it was like a neon sign that said, I just want to kill you.
Wow.
And I saw it in this guy. And I got a little frightened. I walked away. And then I realized maybe this guy was, addicted to drugs or alcohol. Maybe he was angry. Maybe things happened to him when he was younger, and he never got over it, and he never forgave whoever did that to him.
Okay.
A few days later, there was another guy who came to the rehab, and he was a recovering addict, and he was talking to us, and he started to incite the crowd to get them on his side. And he said, how many of you haven't thought about getting a gun and robbing a bank? And I'm like, all right, I already got the first signal. I'm getting it. Yeah. Now I'm getting it twice. Like, just in case I didn't get it the first time, I began to understand possibly who this guy was, or at least what he was made of.
Right.
And then I thought to myself, hell, maybe if I don't forgive, maybe I could become like these guys.
Right.
And I began my process of forgiving. For me, it was hard. I always had with our Lord's Prayer and forgive those who trespass against us. And I always had a hard time after I got shot with that because I could never really say it and believe it. Until one day where I realized that forgiving him was revenge.
Right.
Forgiving him was revenge. In fact, forgiveness is truly the greatest expression of revenge. And I became free.
Well, it's interesting because the Buddhists have an expression: if you plan to kill somebody out of revenge, or if you hold a grudge, it's best you dig 2 graves.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of the healing process. And the book is called From Anger to Enlightenment. And I was fascinated because, I knew that you had had that experience where you saw heaven, but so what would you be angry about? I figured maybe it was the physical pain that you were enduring, but it's also in the guilt.
Mental anguish and the anger, yeah.
And the healing process didn't begin until you let go of that anger.
No.
Wow.
I still have a long way to go, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But getting rid of guilt and anger are huge.
And I'm also, and I don't want to get too far off topic, the first step was peeling back on the pharmaceuticals.
Oh, less is more.
Right.
And, you've got to find the right doctor to prescribe the right things because I've been to some really bad doctors who.
Wow. And I know you were single when it happened. You got married subsequently, but there was some problems in the marriage, or how did that affect your day-to-day existence?
Yeah, I mean, the nightmares and anger, it changes you. It makes you something else. It makes you something that you're not, and it put a horrible, horrible strain on our marriage. But my wife of yesterday, 21 years.
Okay.
21 years yesterday, Maria, she's my angel, and she stayed with me and she helped me, and we're stronger than ever today.
Wow. So you had the enlightenment, you had the epiphany, you go to the rehab. Now, walk us through what happens next. What happens next?
I made a conscious decision that forgiveness is truly the way to go, not because it's letting him off the hook.
Right.
He's going to get what he deserves in another way. But it lets me off the hook. It heals me.
Okay.
Okay? So today, I thank you for shooting me and making me go through all of that because I am a better person because of it. And for giving me, the tools to help survivors of trauma who really need help. One quick story, 2
Sure.
years ago, and this is the reason.
Take your time.
This is the reason that I wrote this book. I never knew who I was supposed to write it to.
Okay.
So 2 years ago, my psychiatrist calls me and says, would you come into the office and sit in the conference room with me and 11 other psychiatrists. So 600 years of experience. I figured these guys are going to help me.
Right.
So I get there and it was the other way around. They wanted me to help them understand what they call post-traumatic stress disorder, but what I call trauma-induced stress.
Right.
I don't like the word disorder. So we sat in a room for an hour and a half. And
you talk about that in the book. That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's not a disorder.
It's not a disorder,
right.
and I don't like that term, so I call it trauma-induced stress. And we sat there, and I explained what a flashback really is. So we're sitting here, and there's a guy right here with a gun, and it's exploding in my head. You don't see him, but he's as real as you are.
Okay.
And nightmares and how they affect you for hours and days later, and all of these symptoms that we feel. And it was like I was feeding children cotton candy. And I said, how do you guys not know this? So, well, we only read it in books.
Right.
So that day, I got out of there, and I said, I know who I have to write this to. Survivors need to know what I know. And this book is the product of that.
Wow. That's you talked about the process, and you just got inspired, and you knew you were just kind of feeding the information from a higher source.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was something was helping me write it the whole time.
And I would imagine that was also a big part of the healing process.
Oh, this book, doing this has transformed not only my life and my faith. Just I don't know. It's like I become something else.
Now, it's not necessarily, you don't have to have had a near-death experience to relate to what's in here. If anybody who has had anything traumatic happen in their life, this can help them.
Oh, absolutely. This book is written to survivors, and it doesn't have to be survivors of gunshots. You could be of any kind of abuse, and there are points in here on how to make your life better again.
Right.
That could help anybody, regardless of what kind of trauma survivor you are.
And there's an old saying, to really live, you have to die once. Or you have to die twice. Once when you actually die, but to really live, you have to have that experience. And I think a lot of us go through something really traumatic. Anything as dramatic as what you went through, but still when something really significant happens in your life, that's almost like that's your starting point on a new life. And
right.
I imagine this book could be very helpful in that regard.
I've already gotten so many responses that it's been tremendous and changed people's lives already, and it's only been out a month.
And they can read it and get a sense of, yeah, that kind of happened to me too, and look what Robert went through, and he got through it eventually.
I hope it gives people hope.
And it reminds me, again, if somebody was saying that, life can be pretty scary. But if you think of it as a movie, okay, if you're seeing a scary movie for the first time, you're nervous and you're worried and you're frightful. But if you're watching the scary movie for the second time and you know that guy gets through it, you're not as afraid.
You're not alone.
You're not alone, but you also know there's a happy ending.
Right, there is a happy ending.
There is a happy ending.
And this is it.
And this is it. And that's, I would imagine, very empowering. And real quick, I just want to, before we wrap up, I want to talk about, you mentioned faith in the book. You define faith. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, for me, faith is this unwavering trust that I have in God that gives me the power and the strength to overcome any obstacle, any day of the week, at any time. Look, I feel horrible most of the time, but there's something helping me. It's my faith. It's what got me through this.
And it's something anybody can tap into.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just have to jump. Just
and
take
that's where the faith comes. Faith is believing in something that you don't actually physically see.
You just have to take a leap.
Right.
You have to get there.
And you took that leap, and you've seen it. You've seen the light, and you came back, and your message is,
God is here. He's all around us.
God is all around. That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. Robert, this has been, like I said, the minute, I think it was Terry Gallagher was telling me about this.
Yes.
I said, I got to meet this man. I got to read the book. The book is called From Anger to Enlightenment, A Survivor's Story of Faith. Robert Palasciano, thank you so much. We could probably talk for a couple of hours here. Where can we get copies of this book?
It's available on Amazon.com in either paper book or ebook, and it's available BarnesandNoble.com for the Nook book. You can also check out the website at FromAngerToEnlightenment.net and see what I have on there.
And if you're available for speaking engagements, or people want to talk to you about it, or you want to talk to groups,
I am getting those requests already. I've done one so far, and I'd be happy to do it anytime. You could email me also through the website anytime you like.
That's
Thank you very much.
Robert,
Michael,
thank you
very much for having me.
Thank you for sharing your
Appreciate
story
it.
with us.
You're welcome.
Well, this has been yet another episode of Mr. Long Island's Search for Truth and Beauty, and I dare say one of our more fascinating ones. Robert, again, I know it was a very painful experience for you, but boy, the hair in the back of my neck is standing up. So I'm really grateful. Grateful to you two for watching. Again, this has been Mr. Long Island's Search for Truth and Beauty. My name is Michael Watt, a.k.a. Mr. Long Island, and I thank you for your time today. The book is From Anger to Enlightenment. Go get it.